My name is Evan, and what happened to me a few years ago is something I'll never forget. I had no idea then how one small decision would change everything. It all started with a phone call that came late one evening. It was around 11 p.m. when my phone rang. I had just returned to my small, isolated cabin just outside of town, after a long day of work at the hardware store in Millerton, a town so quiet and forgotten that most people wouldn't even know it existed unless they passed through. I had spent most of my life here, and I figured I knew every nook and cranny of this place. Nothing ever happened in Millerton. It was too small for anything exciting. But that night, something in the air felt off. When I answered the phone, all I could hear was heavy breathing on the other end. At first, I thought it might be one of my friends playing a prank, but then I heard something else, a faint voice, almost inaudible. It sounded like someone whispering, but they weren't speaking English. The voice was strained and desperate, and it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to say something, but before I could speak, the line went dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat there, staring at the phone in disbelief. I don't know why, but I had this overwhelming sense that I should go to the old part of town. The part that people rarely talked about. The part people avoided. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, but something told me that the call wasn't random. Something told me it was a warning. I grabbed my jacket and decided to take a walk. The air outside was unusually thick, as if the night itself was pressing in on me. The moon was hidden behind dark clouds, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. Millerton wasn't a big town, but there were parts of it that felt as though time had forgotten them. The main street was lined with small shops and houses that all seemed to belong in the past. The old part of town, though, well, it was a different story. It was where everything seemed to stand still. People had stopped talking about that area years ago. They'd stopped walking there. Most had moved away. The ones who remained, well, they never went near it after dark. As I walked through the streets, I could feel my heart rate quicken. Something was off. There were no sounds, no crickets, no rustling leaves. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath. I reached the end of Main Street and stood before the old, crumbling church. The building had been abandoned for years, and the surrounding houses had long since fallen into disrepair. I remember standing there, staring at the door of the church. It seemed to be waiting for me. I don't know why, but I felt this pull, like something was urging me to enter. The wind picked up, howling in my ears, but I pushed forward, my hand trembling as it gripped the cold, rusty handle of the church door. When it creaked open, the stale, musty air hit me like a physical blow. The smell of mildew and decay filled my lungs as I stepped inside. It was darker than I expected. The few weak beams of light that filtered through the broken windows revealed shattered pews, overturned tables, and cracked stained glass windows. And yet, in the back of the church, where the altar once stood, there was something I couldn't explain. A figure. A dark silhouette, almost like a shadow, standing perfectly still in the corner. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. The silence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I couldn't tell if the figure was human or something else. I should have turned around. I should have left. But instead, I stepped forward, drawn in by an invisible force. And that's when I heard it again, the whispering. This time, it wasn't from the phone. It was from the figure. The air in the church grew colder as I approached the figure. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. The whispering grew louder, but it wasn't a language I recognized. It was guttural, almost animalistic, like it was coming from deep within the earth itself. I took another step, and the figure moved. Not like a person, there was no fluidity, no grace to its motion. It was more like it slid across the floor, shifting with unnatural speed, so fast that I barely had time to process what was happening before it was right in front of me. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling over an old pew. That's when I saw its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness. They weren't human. They were wide, empty black pits, surrounded by a thin, grayish skin that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to respond. The whispering, it was growing louder, more frantic, almost desperate. The figure's mouth opened slowly, and that's when I realized the sound was coming from it, from the shadow, from whatever it was. And then it spoke. "Help me." The voice was unlike anything I had ever heard, a raspy whisper that sent a jolt of terror through my body. But it wasn't a voice that was meant to ask for help, it was a command. And that's when I realized it wasn't asking me for help at all. It was begging. But not for my assistance. It was begging for someone else's. Before I could process what was happening, a series of heavy knocks echoed from the back of the church, coming from the basement, deep below the altar. I turned to look, but the figure blocked my path. I couldn't see it clearly now, it was more like a mass of darkness, but I could still feel its eyes on me. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed the nearest thing, a rusty old lantern that hung from the wall, and swung it at the shadow. The light flickered wildly as the glass shattered, but the flame caught for a moment. For just a second, I could see the true form of the thing. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. But I could see something more now, something I couldn't quite make sense of. A symbol carved into its chest. A symbol I knew. I had seen it in old books. Books I shouldn't have been reading. Books that spoke of things far beyond the realm of normal human understanding. And that's when I understood what it wanted. It wanted me to go down there. It wanted me to open that door. I could feel it now, a gnawing pressure in my chest, an overwhelming urge to obey. I turned to the door leading down into the basement, and as if in a trance, I began to walk toward it. But I was not alone. The shadow was right behind me. The cold air in the basement of the church hit me like a physical wall as I descended the stairs, the faint glow of the lantern the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. The steps creaked under my weight, and each sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silence, as if the whole church was listening to me. I wasn't sure what was pushing me forward. Was it fear? Was it some malevolent force pulling me toward the unknown? Or was it just a horrifying curiosity, the same one that led me to stand in front of that church in the first place? Either way, there was no turning back now. I reached the bottom, and the basement stretched out before me, empty except for piles of old, rotting wood and dust-covered relics from the past. But it wasn't the clutter that drew my attention. It was the door at the far end of the room. It stood slightly ajar, as though someone had opened it only a crack and left it that way, as if waiting for someone to walk through. The air around it was thicker, almost oppressive. I could feel a pulse, a heartbeat coming from the other side. A muffled noise came from behind it, like something scratching at the door, desperate to get out. I stepped closer, my hand shaking uncontrollably as I reached for the handle. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, I heard the whispering again, this time, louder and clearer than ever. "Don't open it." I froze. The voice was deep and gravelly, not the soft, pleading whisper from earlier. This was something different. Something darker. My heart raced as I jerked my hand away, but I was already too far gone. It was too late. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Before I knew it, the door swung open with a force that made me stumble back. The room beyond was pitch black, but the moment the door creaked open, I saw them. Eyes. Hundreds of them, glowing faintly in the darkness, all staring directly at me. The floor seemed to move beneath them, as though something, or someone, was shifting in the shadows, lurking just out of sight. And in the midst of the swirling blackness, I saw something else. A figure. A woman, or at least, what had once been a woman. She was hunched over in the corner, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. Her arms were unnaturally long, and her fingers twitched, scratching at the floor like a spider in its web. Her eyes, those horrible, glowing eyes, were fixed on me, and I could see that they weren't just eyes. They were pools of pure blackness, sucking the light out of the room around her. She opened her mouth, revealing a wide grin that split her face from ear to ear. But it wasn't a smile. It was a mask of pure hunger. "You shouldn't have come," the woman rasped, her voice a low, wet whisper that echoed in my skull. "You're too late." The air in the room grew heavier, thicker, and as the woman inched toward me, I realized what I was seeing. This wasn't just some monster or ghost. It was a trap. A trap for the next soul to come through, to make the same mistake I had made, to open the door that should have stayed shut forever. The door behind me slammed shut, trapping me inside with the woman. The eyes, hundreds of eyes, blinked in unison, and I could hear them now, countless whispers, each one sharper and more insistent than the last. They were calling for me. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. My body felt like it was locked in place, as if the room itself was holding me there, feeding off my terror. "Please," I whispered, my throat dry and cracking. "What do you want from me?" The woman's grin widened. "Your soul." I could feel the cold sweat running down my neck as the woman crawled closer, her long fingers scraping the floor like nails on a chalkboard. Every inch she moved sent waves of nausea through my body, but I couldn't look away. Her eyes were locked on mine, glowing with that unbearable emptiness. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare where I was aware of everything but powerless to change anything. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me like 1,000 voices, their words no longer distinguishable, just a constant hum of something dark and ancient. "You can't escape," the woman whispered again, her voice now chillingly calm. "You're part of it now." My heart hammered against my ribs, each thud a reminder that I was alive, but barely. Something in me snapped. I couldn't die here. Not like this. I wouldn't let this thing take me, even if I didn't know what it was. I gathered every ounce of strength I had left, managing to drag my legs forward a few inches, then a few more. "No," I croaked, finally able to speak. "I won't let you have me." The woman's grin twitched. Then, to my horror, her lips parted, and the dark, hollow space behind her mouth expanded as though it could swallow the very air. It wasn't a face anymore, just an abyss. "You have no choice," she rasped, and then, unexpectedly, she stopped. The room seemed to hold its breath. "But, maybe there's a way out for you. A bargain, if you will." I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. A bargain? My mind raced. There was no way this was a fair trade. Whatever she was offering would have consequences, but at that point, I was desperate. Anything was better than becoming, whatever those eyes wanted me to be. "What do you want from me?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible, barely my own. The woman's eyes flickered, and then she laughed, the sound like rustling dead leaves. "I want your soul." The words echoed in the dark room, and I felt them sink into my very bones. There was no escaping it now, not unless I played by her rules. But the terror in my chest burned hotter than my fear. I wasn't ready to die, not like this, not to whatever she was. How can I escape?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do I have to do?" For a moment, the woman didn't speak. The room seemed to grow colder, more oppressive, the whispers louder, as if the darkness itself was watching us. "A soul for a soul," she said finally. "Give me what I want, and you can leave. You'll live, and others will fall into the trap in your place. It's that simple." My stomach churned. The thought of offering anyone else to this thing, this monster, was unfathomable. But she was right. She controlled this place. She controlled everything. I can't do that," I whispered, feeling the weight of my words, my soul, slipping away with every breath. The woman leaned in close, her breath like ice against my skin. Then you will stay. Forever. Or. She tilted her head, as if considering. There's another way. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. What is it? Her eyes gleamed with something dark, something I couldn't place. Your blood. You offer me your blood, and I'll let you go. But make no mistake. I will take it all, *. I stumbled back in shock. Blood? That was all. That seemed too easy, too simple. It couldn't be. But in the silence that followed, my thoughts raced. There was no time left. I had to make a choice. Your blood, Evan, she repeated, her voice now like a command. Or your soul. I hesitated, my body fighting against the urge to comply. The darkness around me was closing in. The whispers were growing so loud now that I could barely hear my own thoughts. Then, something inside me broke. I couldn't sacrifice anyone else. I couldn't let this thing have its way. I reached out, grabbed the sharp edge of a broken chair leg, and pressed it to my skin. Take it, I whispered through clenched teeth. Take my blood, but let me leave. The woman's smile stretched wider, her eyes gleaming with victory. So be it. The pain was instantaneous. The jagged chair leg sliced through my skin like butter, and blood began to pour from the wound. I winced, trying to control my breathing, but the blood seemed to flow faster than it should have. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the task at hand. The woman stood before me, her face a mask of twisted anticipation, as though my suffering only fueled her power. Her eyes glowed brighter, her grin wider, and the room grew colder still. The air was thick with an ancient malevolence, pressing in on me from every direction. But I kept my focus on the bleeding wound, offering the blood as promised. Take it, I repeated, my voice hoarse. Let me go. The woman took a step forward, her movement smooth and fluid, like liquid darkness. She reached out slowly, her long, gnarled fingers brushing against my blood-soaked hand. The moment her skin touched mine, I felt a shock, like a jolt of electric energy running through my veins. And then, to my horror, I felt something else. A cold emptiness spreading from my chest, slowly swallowing everything around it. The blood, my blood, began to pull away from me, leaving my body in a rush. It was no longer mine. It felt wrong, alien, as if I was being drained from the inside out. No. I cried, trying to pull back, but my body refused to obey. I was too weak. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed to the floor. The woman's fingers gripped my arm, holding me down with an unnatural strength. You agreed, she hissed, her voice low and twisted. You gave it to me. I gasped, my head spinning. The world around me seemed to tilt and blur. I couldn't breathe. My vision flickered in and out. I could feel my life slipping away, being pulled out of me. The pain was unbearable, but it wasn't just physical, it was as if my very essence was being ripped apart, torn from the fabric of my existence. And then, the room went silent. The whispers stopped. The woman released her grip, and I felt the pressure on my chest ease slightly. I dared to open my eyes, and in the dim light, I saw her step back. Her lips curled into a satisfied smile. You're still alive, she murmured, almost disappointed. But not for long. I looked down at my arm, where the blood had once been flowing freely. The wound was still open, but there was no more blood, nothing left but a strange, numb emptiness where my life force had once been. I tried to move, to stand, but my body felt heavy, weak, like it wasn't mine anymore. You were lucky, the woman said, her voice growing distant. You gave me enough to survive, but you won't last long. You'll feel it soon. The darkness will follow you. It always does. I could barely hear her now, the buzzing in my head growing louder. My mind felt foggy, and my limbs refused to respond. The weight of the room pressed down on me, the air thick and oppressive, like the very walls were closing in. I wanted to run. I needed to run. But I couldn't. "Go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Leave. But you'll always know. I'll be watching. And when the time comes, I'll claim what's left of you." I stumbled toward the door, my legs barely holding me up. The woman didn't stop me. She didn't need to. She had what she wanted. I didn't know how I made it out of that church. My mind was a blur of half-formed thoughts, my body a hollow shell of its former self. As I stepped out into the night air, the cool breeze hit my face, but it did nothing to soothe the gnawing emptiness inside me. The moon hung high in the sky, but everything felt wrong. The town, Millerton, seemed different somehow. The silence was deafening. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting. I thought I had escaped. I thought the bargain had freed me. But I was wrong. The whispers had followed me. And they wouldn't stop. It didn't take long for me to realize that the woman's warning wasn't an idle threat. The emptiness inside me, what she had taken, began to grow, twisting into something darker, something I couldn't control. The whispers. They were always there, just on the edge of my hearing. At first, it was only at night. Soft, incoherent murmurs in the shadows. But soon, it began to seep into the daytime, too. At work, at home, everywhere I went. It was as if the air itself was alive with 1,000 voices, always just below the surface, always calling to me. I tried to ignore it. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the more I tried, the louder the whispers became. They started to shape themselves into words. The same phrase over and over again, "Come back." I would hear it in the middle of the night, in the silence of my home. I would hear it when I walked down the street, when I was alone in my car. It was a constant presence, like a shadow trailing behind me, never far enough for me to escape. I tried to fight it. I went to a doctor, thinking maybe I was losing my mind. But all the tests came back normal. Physically, I was fine. But I knew better. I could feel the darkness clawing at the edges of my sanity. The day came when I could no longer ignore it. The whispers had grown too loud, too insistent. They were a roar now, filling my mind until I couldn't think of anything else. I found myself standing at the edge of the woods, just outside of Millerton. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, and in the distance, I could make out the faint outline of the church. The church that had trapped me. The church that had taken so much from me. I knew I couldn't run anymore. The whispers were a part of me now, and there was no escaping them. The bargain she had made with me, it had bound me to her, to that place, to whatever ancient force had been lurking in the shadows of Millerton for so long. I took one last, shuddering breath, and then I stepped forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder, the silence deeper. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and as I approached the church, the door creaked open by itself, as if expecting me. Inside, the darkness was suffocating. The woman, was waiting, her smile already stretched wide across her face, her eyes gleaming with that same hunger I had seen before. "You came back," she whispered, the words like a caress, but they sent chills down my spine. "I knew you would." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The room was spinning, and I felt the weight of everything closing in on me, the whispers, the emptiness, the cold darkness that had become my life. "You can never leave," she said, her voice now sharp, commanding. "You gave me your blood. You gave me everything, and now you are mine." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but there was nothing left of me. I had nothing to give. I had traded it all. And so, as the woman reached for me, as her dark fingers wrapped around my throat, I finally understood the price of my bargain. There was no escaping the darkness. Not for me. Not ever. As the last breath left my body, I heard the whispers one final time. You're one of us now. And I knew, deep down, that the cycle would begin again. That someone else, some other fool, would one day hear the call and step into the darkness. The church, the whispers, the woman, they were eternal, and I had become part of that eternal nightmare.